there, this is Brittany from Just Be Crafty, and today I'm going to show you how to make this super awesome wine bottle sweater. This project is the perfect way to dress up a wine bottle for a Christmas gift or as a hostess gift for your next holiday party. Whoever you give this to will absolutely love it and appreciate the thought that went into making it. And the best part is that it looks super complicated, but it's really not once you get the hang of it. With that said, this tutorial is geared more for intermediate to advanced knitters. The stitching is not complicated, but it is a little tough getting started on the double pointed needles for the first couple rounds. For this pattern, you'll be working with 5 double pointed needles or DPNs. Your work will be spread across 4 needles and you will use 1 working needle, so that's 5. DPNs typically come in sets of 4, so you'll most likely need to purchase 2 packs, so just be aware of that. As always, I'll have all my materials linked in the description box below. Also in the description box will be links to the written pattern, which you'll want to follow along with as you watch the video. You can view the pattern for free on my blog or purchase the printable PDF in my Etsy shop, so you have some options. Before we get started, I want to take the time to invite you to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and to hit the bell so you never miss a new tutorial. I post new patterns on Tuesdays and new stitch techniques on Fridays, so you definitely don't want to miss out. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to begin this project by casting on 8 stitches onto one of our double pointed needles. And I know I mentioned this before, but I just want to mention this again. You're going to need a total of 5 double pointed needles. Packages typically only carry 4 double pointed needles, so you're most likely going to need to get 2 packs. Just wanted to get that out there. I'm casting on my 8 stitches onto my double pointed needle. And you want to make sure you're casting on as evenly as possible. Alright, I got my stitches on there. I did a quick recount to make sure I have the right amount. And now I am going to divide these 8 stitches over 4 needles. So that'll be 2 stitches per needle. So I'm going to do that right now. And I'm also being careful that I'm not going to twist any of my stitches. I'm adding in my second needle. And now I'm adding in my third. And on my 4th and final needle, I already had the 2 stitches. Before we get started doing anything, I suggest that you reorient yourself and lay your needles out in front of you into a circle. Lay your stitches out like so and have your last cast on stitch towards the bottom, just like I have. So make sure your stitches look like this. Pause it if you need to. Just kind of hold your tail out of the way a little bit. And if you have a really long tail, make sure you clip it so you can tell the difference between your working yarn and your tail. So you can see where my last cast on stitch is. And now we're going to take those stitches and we're going to rotate them a bit. We're going to rotate them so now the last cast on stitch is at the top. So go ahead and do that. Orient yourself with all the stitches. Get your tail out of the way. And now we're ready to begin round 1. So pick up your 5th knitting needle. And we're going to start by knitting in the round. So I suggest moving your top needle, the needle with the last cast on stitch, move that behind the needle you're about to work into. And we're going to start by knitting into the front and back stitch of all of these stitches. So we're going to be increasing 1 stitch for each stitch. So at the end of this round, we're going to have 16 stitches. So you knit into the front and back of that stitch. So now that 1 stitch turned into 2. And now we're going to do that same thing for the next stitch. We're going to knit into both the front and back of that stitch to increase it. and we now have 4 stitches onto that knitting needle. And now that freed up our next knitting needle. Now we're ready to work on the next 2 stitches in our round. So just like we did before, for the first 2 stitches, we're going to knit into the front and back of both of those stitches to increase them. As you can see, this is very awkward. For the first couple of rounds, it is very awkward and cumbersome. If you're new to double pointed needles, or even if you're not new to double pointed needles, this is going to take some practice. And honestly, the first round is a little rough. But once you get past the first few rounds, I promise it will get better, and it's not going to be like this throughout the whole project. Okay, so now I'm ready to move on to my third needle. And I find it best to, after you just finished knitting, so now I'm moving on to my next needle, and I'm knitting into the front and back of both of those stitches as well. Okay, now the next stitch, I'm knitting into the front and back of that stitch too. Okay, that needle is done. And now we're ready to move on to our last needle. We only have 2 stitches left in the round. And I'm sure you guessed it, we're going to knit into the front and back of both of those stitches as well, because we're increasing in every stitch in our round. Like I said, I know this is challenging. I promise it'll get better. Just stick with it. And if you're finding that this is just too difficult and you cannot get your needles to coordinate the way you want them to, you can do this over 3 knitting needles to start. And then once you get going in a few rounds, you can then separate them back onto 4 needles. Alright, so I just finished my last stitch of the round, and now we should have 16 total stitches. So we have 4 stitches on each of our needles. Make sure you orient yourself, kind of rearrange your stitches so none of them are falling off of any of your needles. And now we're ready to begin round 2. Okay, so for round 2, we are simply going to just knit into each stitch across the round. I know this round is going to be a little bit challenging too. It's not as challenging as that first round, but it will be a little bit challenging, but just do the best you can. And if you have to restart, no worries. Restart as many times as you need to. If you like, pause here and meet back up with me once you've knitted to the end of the round. Okay, so I've completed round 2 and now I'm ready to start round 3. And to make it easier so I can keep track of where I'm at in my rounds, I'm going to mark the second to last stitch with a stitch marker, just so I know which needle is my last needle. Round 3 is going to be another increase round. So we're going to start round 3 by increasing into the first stitch. We're going to knit into the front and back of that first stitch. So we're knitting into the front, and now into the back of that same stitch. We've turned that one stitch into 2, and then we're going to knit into the next stitch. Okay, we're going to increase the next one, so knitting into the front and back of the next stitch. And then we're going to knit one. You're going to repeat knitting into the front and back and knit one until you get to the end of the round. At the end of this round, you should end with 24 stitches. If you'd like, pause here and meet back up with me once you get to the end of the round. Okay, so we just completed row 3 and now we're ready to begin row 4. For row 4, we're simply going to knit into each stitch across the round. And once we get to round 4, you should really start to notice that knitting across the 4 knitting needles is not so difficult anymore. From this point on, the pattern is smooth sailing. So we just finished round 4 and now we're ready to begin round 5. Round 5 is another increase row. So we're going to start by knitting into the front and back of that first stitch. And that increase stitch is going to be followed by 2 knit stitches. So we're knitting into the next one. And now we're knitting into the next one. The next stitch we're going to increase into the front and back. And then we're going to simply knit the next 2 stitches. You're going to repeat the process of increase 1 and then knit 2 until you reach the end of the round. At the end of this round, you should end with 32 stitches. We're now ready to begin row 6, and for row 6 we're simply going to knit into each stitch until we get to the end of the round. We've just finished row 6 and we're now ready to begin row 7. Row 7 is another increase round, so we're going to once again increase into that first stitch. And then we're going to knit into each of the next 3 stitches. So 1, 2, and 3. The next stitch is an increase, so we're knitting into the front and back. And then we're going to knit 1, 2, and 3. Keep repeating the process of increasing 1 and knitting into the next 3 until you get to the end of the round. We're now getting ready to start round 8, and for round 8 we're going to be knitting into each stitch across the round. Just finished round 8 and now we're ready to start round 9. For round 9, we're going to increase into the first stitch, and then we're going to knit into each of the 4 next stitches. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we're going to increase again. So increase into that next stitch. And then knit into each of the next 4 stitches. Repeat that process until you get to the end of the round. After round 9, you should end with 48 stitches. We've just completed round 9 and now we're ready to start round 10, and for round 10 we're going to just be knitting into each stitch across the round. Okay, now we're ready to do round 11. This is our last increase round. We're going to start by increasing into the first stitch. And then we're going to knit into each of the next 5 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You're going to keep repeating this process to the end of the round. At the end of round 11, you should have 56 stitches total. Okay, so now we're ready to do round 12, and for round 12 we're simply going to knit into each stitch across the round. We're now ready to begin round 13, which starts the body of our project. So to start round 13, we're going to begin by knitting into the first stitch, and then we're going to purl 2. So we're purling this stitch, and then purling the next stitch, and then next the pattern says to C8R, which means an 8-stitch cable to the right. To do this, we're going to move 4 stitches onto a stitch holder, and you can use kind of whatever you have. I do have a cable needle, but of course I couldn't find it right before I was filming this video, so I'm using this little thingamabob that I have, and I'm honestly not really sure what it's used for, but it's working just fine for this purpose. You could also use an extra double-pointed needle. You're going to move that behind your work, and then we're going to knit into the next stitches. And oops, since those last stitches were purled, I forgot I need to move my yarn to the back of my needle. So now I'm going to knit into the next 4 stitches with those cable stitches just hanging out right behind my work. So this is the 3rd and 4th knit stitch. And now I'm going to knit the 4 stitches off of our cable marker, and this is what creates that twist. This is going to be a little bit awkward, but I promise you can do it. You might just have to it just takes a little bit of patience. So we're going to knit into each of those 4 stitches that were hanging out on our stitch holder. So I just have 2 left. And now my last one. Okay, so we've just done our first cable. And now we're ready to purl into the next 2 stitches. and then we're going to knit into that next stitch. Okay, so we've just done our first needle, and now we're ready to move on to our next one. And I'll show you this whole process again. So our next stitch is going to be knit, and then we're going to purl into the next 2 stitches. So purl, purl again, and then next is our cable. So grab your stitch holder, and we're going to move the next 4 stitches onto our stitch holder. We're going to place that behind our work. And now we are going to knit into the next 4 stitches. So see, your stitches are just hanging out there behind your work. And now this is the 4th one. And now we're ready to knit our 4 stitches off of our stitch holder. And again, this is super awkward, but I promise you can do it. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, we can set our stitch holder aside, and now we're going to purl into the next 2 stitches. And then knit into the last stitch. And now you're just going to repeat that process for the remaining 2 needles. Okay, so we just finished round 13 and we're ready to begin round 14. We're going to start round 14 by knitting into the first stitch. We're going to purl into the next 2 stitches. So purl and purl again. Then we're going to just simply knit over the next 8 stitches. So knit into each of the next 8 stitches. And some of them might be a little bit tight because remember we just did the cabling from the round before. So this is 7 and 8. We're going to purl into each of the next 2 stitches. So 1 and 2. And then you're going to knit into the next stitch. Our next stitch is going to be knit. We're going to purl into each of the next 2. Then you're going to knit into the next 8 stitches. And now we're going to purl into each of the next 2. And now we're going to knit into the next stitch. You'll simply repeat that same process for the remaining 2 needles. Okay, so we've just finished round 14, and now rounds 15 through 19 is just going to be a repeat of round 14. So if you'd like, pause here and meet back up with me once you've completed up through round 19. Okay, so I've just completed round 19 and now I'm ready to begin round 20. Round 20 is simply going to be a repeat of round 13, which was we start by knitting into the first stitch. We purl into each of the next two. And now we do a repeat of our C8R. So once again, we're going to move the next 4 stitches onto our stitch holder. Those are on the stitch holder with my cable needle behind my work. I'm going to knit into each of the next 4 stitches. Okay, so I knit the next 4 stitches. Now I'm ready to knit the 4 stitches off of my stitch holder. Okay, and now we're ready to purl into the next 2. So 1 and 2, and then knit into the next stitch. Repeat this process for the remaining 3 needles. As you know, we're currently working on round 13, and for the remainder of the project, you're just going to be repeating rounds 13 through 19 until your entire piece measures to be about 10.5 inches, or the desired length for your wine bottle. You can really make this as short or as long as you'd like it to be by increasing or decreasing the amount of repeats that you complete. If you like, pause here and meet back up with me once you've knitted your project to your desired length. And then we'll work on our little popped collar. Okay, at this point I've reached my desired length and now I'm ready to work on the collar. For the collar, we're going to be working back and forth in rows and not in rounds because we want there to be an opening for our collar. So this is what your piece should look like by this time. And now we're ready to begin row 1 of our collar. So starting in that first stitch, we're going to knit, and in the second stitch, we're going to purl. You're going to continue in knit 1, purl 1 ribbing until you reach the end of the row. I'm almost to the end of the row. I just have 2 more stitches left. So I'm knitting, moving my stitch marker, and then I'm going to purl into my last stitch. Okay, so now I'm ready to begin row 2 of my collar. So I'm going to turn my work, because we're not working it around anymore. I'm turning my work. And now I am going to work knit 1, purl 1, again back the other way. So in that first stitch, I'm going to work a knit 1. I'm going to move that stitch marker. You really don't need it anymore at this point because you can really tell where the row starts and finishes. But we're going to purl into that next stitch, knit into the next one. And now you're simply going to work back and forth in rows, working knit 1, purl 1 ribbing until your little popped collar portion reaches to be about 2.5 inches. So if you'd like, pause here and meet back up with me once you've completed your collar. At this point, this is what your collar should look like. And my collar is about 2.5 inches, and I'm ready to bind off. So we're going to bind off by starting by knitting into the first stitch. We're going to purl into the next stitch. And now I'm going to take that first stitch and slide it up and over the second stitch and off of my needle. I'm going to knit into the next stitch. I'm going to slide that first stitch up and over and off of my needle. We're going to purl into the next stitch, slide that first stitch up and over the second and off my needle. Continue in this process until you get to the end of the round and you've bound off all of your stitches. Okay, I just have a couple more stitches left, just one more stitch left to bind off. I'm purling into that last and final stitch, and now I'm sliding that first stitch up and over the second and off of my needle. So yay, the knitting portion is done. So exciting. How cute does this look? We're now ready to cut our yarn. And now we're ready to take that tail and pull it through that last little loop that was on our needle. Pull it tight to secure. Okay, how cute does this look? So exciting. Now it is time to do the finishing touches. So we're going to weave in our ends and then we're going to add our buttons. Grab your yarn needle. I have this little set from Clover. It comes in a little case, which is perfect because I'm always losing these little needles. I got this at Joann's and I'll have it linked in the description box below. Grab your yarn needle and pick one of your tails and thread it into the needle. I like to weave in my ends on the back of my work so it's a little bit less conspicuous. But I'm just going to take my tail and kind of insert it into my stitches like so, under and over every other stitch. And I'm working down in one direction. So once I've gone down about 1.5 inches, I'm going to just work my way back. Okay, so I think this looks good. I'm ready to clip my yarn and see, you can really barely see that tail. And that's what we want. So now I'm ready to weave in the other end. And for this, I'm going to turn my sweater inside out so I can weave it in the bottom. I'm just working my needle into every other stitch, kind of working in one direction. And then I'm going to work my way back. I'm going to keep repeating this process until I feel like I've sufficiently weaved in this end as well. I think this looks good, and I'm just going to clip my yarn. Now all that's left is to turn the sweater back right side out and I'm going to sew my buttons on. I have my sewing needle, embroidery floss, and buttons ready. So grab your thread and thread your needle. But before I do anything else, I want to plan out where I put my buttons onto the sweater so I know where I'm going to start sewing. Grab your buttons and kind of eyeball and place them where you want. If you want to get exact, you can use a little stitch marker or some yarn and mark exactly where you want your stitches, but for me, eyeballing is just fine. I have my top button. I'm going to start there, and I'm going to start by inserting my needle into working from the back of my work to the front and going up through the buttonhole. And now I'm going to go back into my sweater by going down into the next hole. And so the way I have my buttons oriented is I kind of have them in the shape of like a plus. I have 2 holes going vertical and 2 holes going horizontal. And so right now I'm working on my vertical holes. I'm going to do this sewing motion 3 times for each of the openings. So this is my 3rd time. Okay, so I've gone this way 3 times, and now I'm going to do the other way 3 times. I'm just working back and forth through the horizontal holes now. So once you feel like your button is sufficiently sewed on, I like to take my 2 tails and just tie them together. If you have a preferred method for this, do your preferred method. But for me, just tying the 2 tails into a knot and then clipping the tails as close to the knot as possible is good enough for my purposes. Because remember, these aren't actually working buttons. Okay, so I'm just going to clip those 2 tails. And now I'm ready to work on the next button. I'm going to eyeball where I want that button to go. I'm going to keep my hand on the button so to keep it in place. Repeat this process that we just did for the remaining 2 buttons. All buttons are sewn on, and this is what the project looks like. It's so cute, and now all that's left to do is to slide a wine bottle in here and you have yourself a perfect gift. Trust me, this will be a conversation starter and the recipient will absolutely love this. I really hope you found this tutorial helpful, and if you did, let me know by giving the video a thumbs up, and if you haven't already and would like to, be sure to subscribe so you never miss a new video. I typically come out with new patterns on Tuesdays and new stitch techniques on Fridays, so you definitely don't want to miss out. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!